She rescued a dog from the rain. What he carried was a lifetime of scars. One morning, the leash was still hanging, but the dog was gone. Ash, Eliza's German shepherd, vanished without a sound. The door hadn't been broken, no signs of struggle, just absence. Panic spread fast. Calls went unanswered. The local shelter had no sightings, until a whisper led her to a name: Victor Gray, a man known only in rumor, a trainer of dogs, brutal ones. As Eliza followed the trail, she uncovered something bigger than a missing dog. She uncovered a system that broke them for profit, then discarded them when they failed. But Ash didn't break. He fought, and now she would fight for him. What she didn't know was that this rescue would rescue her back. The engine cut out with a reluctant sigh, and for a moment the only sound was the ticking of the truck's cooling metal. Eliza Monroe sat behind the wheel, her hands still on the steering wheel long after the vehicle stopped moving. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she stepped out, and the scent of pine, damp earth, and faded memory filled her lungs like a ghost she hadn't invited. Hollow Ridge hadn't changed much. The trees still bowed low as if listening to the wind's secrets, and the air still held that sharp mountain chill, even in early spring. But time had done its quiet work weathering rooftops, dulling paint, and swallowing the voices that once echoed between porches. Nothing looked broken. And yet, everything felt like it had been waiting for her to return. Her house stood at the end of a dirt road lined with slumped fence posts and tired mailboxes. The same two-story farmhouse her late husband had built with calloused hands before the war called her away for the third and final time. A porch swing hung still, frayed at the ropes. The paint had peeled down to the bone. She hadn't seen it in decades, not really. And now it stood like a monument to lives paused, not lived. She unlocked the door, hesitated, and stepped inside. The air inside was dry and brittle, like a place that had forgotten to breathe. Her boots echoed on the hardwood floor, dust blooming with every step. Sunlight crept in through stained curtains, revealing sheets draped over furniture like bodies at rest. She tugged one off the couch, shaking loose a cloud of time. Her fingers brushed the worn fabric, and it struck her. How foreign softness felt now. A photo on the mantel caught her eye. She didn't reach for it, just stared. Her daughter, 8 years old, missing her front teeth, held up a messy drawing of a horse. Next to her, Eliza smiled, not the tight, tired one she'd grown used to giving strangers, but a real smile, the kind that crinkled her eyes. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. There were more photos in a box in the hallway. Ones from her deployments, black and white shots of med tents, sandbags, and soldiers throwing peace signs like kids at summer camp. Eliza had packed them away the year her husband died. She didn't want her daughter to grow up in a house haunted by uniforms and folded flags. But now, the war had come home anyway, etched into her spine, hidden in her breath, buried in the space behind her eyes. She opened the hall closet. Inside, 2 boxes sat side by side. One was labeled Rebecca's room, her daughter's things. The other just said Eliza. She ran her fingers across the edge of the box like tracing the name on a headstone, then opened it. War medals glinted dimly beneath plastic casing. A silver star, a combat medical badge, a ribbon frayed at one end, and beneath them all, a folded letter, yellowed and creased. She didn't open it. Instead, she sat on the floor, back pressed to the wall, and let the silence fill her ears. Not the quiet of peace, but the buzzing, crushing kind, the one that amplifies every heartbeat, every memory. That's when the tremor started. In her left hand, crawling up her forearm like a cold whisper, she closed her eyes. In her dreams, if they could be called that, there was always screaming. A tourniquet cinched too late. A voice calling for someone named Doc. A heartbeat thudding in her palms. A body convulsing, then still. That night, she didn't sleep in a bed. She pulled an old wool blanket from the closet and curled up beside the front door, just like she had on bad nights overseas, when it felt safer to be near the exit. Just in case. She didn't undress. Didn't turn off the porch light. She stared at the ceiling for hours, as rain began to tap against the roof like distant gunfire. At some point, her eyes drifted shut. And then the thunder came. The sound cracked like an explosion. Her body jerked before her mind could catch up, a raw, involuntary response. She gasped, sitting bolt upright, hands searching for something, anything to hold on to. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Panic didn't knock, it never did. It simply arrived and took what it wanted. She rocked slightly, forehead resting against her knees, whispering to herself through clenched teeth, "You're not there. You're not there. You're not there." But it didn't matter. The war had come back with her. It never left. Morning came gray and indifferent. By noon, she was in the truck again, driving with no direction, letting the hills swallow the road behind her. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the kind of silence that felt pregnant with something about to break. That's when she saw it. Just past a bend in the road, near a culvert half hidden by wild brush and fallen branches, something moved. She slowed, squinted. At first she thought it was just a mound of wet earth, but then it shifted. Lying in the mud, soaked to the skin, ribs visible beneath matted fur, was a German shepherd, a big one, not moving, but not dead either. Eliza put the truck in park. Her boots sank into the wet grass as she approached, slow, hands open. The dog watched her. No growl, no flinch. Just a tired, haunted stare, like a creature that had seen more than it was ever meant to. It reminded her of something. Someone. "I'm not going to hurt you," she murmured. "And you're not dying out here. Not tonight." He didn't move. But when she reached the back of the truck and opened the tailgate, he lifted his head. No sound, no protest, just resignation, and maybe, buried deep inside, a flicker of trust. He climbed in on his own. Eliza didn't ask where he'd come from. She didn't need to. They drove home in silence, and for the first time since she returned to Hollow Ridge, she wasn't completely alone. The smell came first. Burnt gauze, diesel fuel, blood. Then the sound, sharp and unrelenting. Sirens howled through fabric walls that rippled like skin under strain. A soldier's voice broke the noise. "Medic! Medic, over here!" Eliza's hands moved before her thoughts did. The battlefield was chaos wrapped in sand, and smoke bodies carried in, dropped like sacks of broken parts. She kneeled beside the stretcher as the man bled from his chest. 18, maybe 19. Too young to have scars. Too old to pretend he wasn't dying. "Stay with me," she said, voice low and firm. "You hear me?" His eyes were wild, terrified. "Am I?" "No," she cut in. "Not today." Her hands moved fast-gloved fingers pressing into the wound, gauze soaked within seconds. Another medic shouted something. She didn't hear it. All that existed was this boy, this second, this arterial spray of red that would not stop no matter how hard she pressed. He gripped her wrist, hard. "Tell my mom." His eyes went glassy before he could finish. The grip slackened. Eliza leaned closer, but the line had already gone flat. She stayed there, still pressing. As if by force of will, she could keep the blood inside. As if her refusal to stop meant the universe had to listen. But it never listened. The thunder cracked so loud it made the floor vibrate. Eliza's eyes flew open. She wasn't in the tent anymore. She was back in Hollow Ridge. Back on the hardwood floor of her own front room, heart slamming against her rib cage as if trying to punch its way out. The blanket wrapped around her was soaked in sweat. Her fingers clawed at it, not knowing if they were reaching for comfort or trying to tear free. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the ceiling like an X-ray of her fear. Her breath hitched, shallow and sharp. The sirens in her head hadn't stopped. She pressed her palms against the wood and tried to ground herself. This isn't Kandahar. This isn't Fallujah. There's no chopper overhead. No gunfire. No tourniquet too late. And yet her body didn't believe her. Panic attacks didn't care about reality. They crawled through memory like vines, wrapping tight around the lungs until the present suffocated under the weight of what once was. She crawled toward the front door on instinct, not logic, and leaned her back against it, forehead pressed to the cool frame. Her chest heaved. Her fingers trembled. Rain splattered hard against the window panes like footsteps running toward her. In her mind, the battlefield refused to stay buried. She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, and rocked slightly, not for comfort, just for rhythm, something steady, something real. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, the storm outside settled into a softer rhythm, but the one inside her stayed restless. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her flannel shirt and stared across the room at the shadows. One of them moved. She froze, then blinked. It was the dog, the German shepherd she had pulled from the ditch just yesterday. Now dry, bandaged, and impossibly quiet, stood a few feet away, watching her. His eyes weren't wide with fear or alert with aggression. They were calm, tired maybe, but aware, like he recognized something in her posture, her shivering, the way her jaw clenched like it was holding in a scream. He stepped forward slowly. No tail wag, no whimper, just presence. Then, without a sound, he sat beside her. Eliza didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her pride was fraying, and she didn't want anyone, not even a dog, to see the unraveling. But she felt the warmth of him near her hip, felt the way his body settled against the door, mirroring hers. It was the first time in years that something living had chosen to sit that close without needing anything from her. She swallowed hard. "You don't know what this is," she whispered. But maybe he did. The storm outside softened into rain, the kind that hushes the world. And in that hush, something cracked, not loudly but distinctly, like the quiet snapping of an old branch finally giving way under its own weight. She let her head fall to the side, resting lightly against his shoulder. No one had ever told her how quiet survival could be, how healing sometimes came not with speeches or breakthroughs, but with silent company on a bad night. She woke a few hours later, body stiff but breathing slow. The sun filtered in through the sheer curtains. Dust danced in the light like old thoughts finally letting go. The dog, still unnamed, lay beside her with his chin on his paws, eyes half closed. She studied him now, The scars on his ear, the way his tail stayed low, cautious. The faint tattoo barely visible beneath the fur, K9 4529. Police unit, military, abandoned, lost. It didn't matter. Not today. She reached out, her fingers brushing the ruff of his neck. "I should call you something," she murmured. He didn't respond, of course, just blinked slowly, deliberately. Eliza considered the names she used to know, all the call signs, all the dogs who never made it back, the handlers who folded up their vests and never put them on again. "Ash," she said finally. The dog looked at her. "You came out of the fire, and you're still here." "So am I," she didn't say. The dog didn't flinch, didn't turn away. Ash. It fit. The roads that threaded the outskirts of Hollow Ridge had long forgotten what it meant to carry more than dust and memory. They coiled between fields gone to seed, past barns with roofs caved in like tired lungs, and silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the crunch of Eliza Munro's tires over gravel. She hadn't meant to be out this far. Not really. But sleep had fled again last night, and when dawn came with its dull light and unsympathetic promise, she'd gotten in her truck and started driving, chasing nothing, escaping everything. Sometimes she thought if she drove far enough, the ghosts would forget how to follow her. Rain had come suddenly, sharp and cold, blurring the windshield with streaks like running ink. Thunder still rumbled in the distance, not loud, just enough to make her shoulders tense. The kind of storm that didn't scream, but murmured warnings under its breath. Her eyes caught movement near the bend in the road, a shape that didn't belong. She slowed the truck to a crawl, squinting through the glass. There, near a flooded culvert, was a mound of fur and bone. At first glance it could have been a dead deer or a log tangled in weeds, but something in the stillness told her otherwise. It was too deliberate, too held. She pulled over, let the engine idle. For a moment she didn't move, just stared. Her breath fogged the windshield. The rain tapped louder now, as if urging her to decide. Then she opened the door. The cold hit her like an accusation. Sharp, wet wind curled around her ankles as she stepped out and closed the door gently behind her. Every sound seemed to pull from memory. The crunch of her boots on soaked gravel, the low hum of running water in the ditch, the distant creak of branches in the wind. Sounds from another life, another battlefield. She approached slowly, hands open, unthreatening. That's when she saw him. A German shepherd, large, soaked to the skin, lying on his side with one paw tucked awkwardly beneath him. His fur was caked in mud and blood. One eye was swollen shut. His ribs showed beneath the matted coat, too many, too sharp. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. One eye opened, tracked her approach. There was no growl, no snarl, no flinch, only exhaustion. And something else, too. Something achingly familiar. She crouched a few feet away, ignoring the rain that had already begun to soak through her jacket. "You're not dead," she murmured. "Not yet." The dog didn't move. Eliza studied him closer. The pads of his paws were torn, like he'd been running hard over broken ground. There were old scars beneath the fresh wounds, and near the base of his ear, partly obscured by dried blood and grime, she spotted a faint tattoo. K9. Something. She didn't need to see the rest. She knew that mark. She'd treated dogs like him overseas. Partners. Warriors. Survivors of a different war no one ever honored. Her throat tightened. She moved closer, just enough to be within reach. The rain ran down her cheeks, like tears she didn't claim. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not here to finish you. I've seen enough death." Still no movement, but he was watching her, that one good eye fixed, not pleading, not panicked, just present. She looked back toward her truck, then at the dog again. "You can lie here and give up," she said softly, "or you can come with me. But either way—" She swallowed. "You're not dying tonight." The dog didn't lift his head, not right away, but after a breath, a blink, a moment that felt like it cracked something deep inside her. He moved, barely, just a shift of muscle. But then he tried to stand. His back leg gave out and he crumpled again. Eliza stepped forward instinctively. "Easy, soldier," she said, her voice steadier now. "You don't have to do it alone." She knelt beside him, her hand outstretched but still, waiting for rejection that never came. Slowly she reached under his chest and helped him upright. He wobbled, shuddered, leaned into her. His body was warm, even soaked through, shivering, but he stayed up. Together they hobbled toward the truck. Eliza opened the tailgate and laid a tarp over the bed, then placed an old wool blanket on top. "It's not a stretcher, but it'll do," she muttered. She turned back to him, preparing for resistance. There was none. He climbed in on his own. No sound, no complaint. She shut the tailgate, got into the driver's seat, and sat for a moment watching him through the rear window. Still silent, but now breathing steadier, still watching her. She didn't ask where he came from, didn't need to. Some stories were carved in silence, mud and scar tissue, not in words. As she put the truck in gear and turned back toward home, she glanced once more into the mirror. The rain blurred his shape, but not his presence. And for reasons she couldn't name, Eliza Monroe. The woman who hadn't prayed in years found herself whispering, "Hang on, Ash. We're not done yet." The tub was old, claw-footed, chipped at the base like a relic from a time when things were built to last and left to rust. Steam curled into the ceiling as warm water filled halfway, the sound echoing off faded tile and cracked grout. Ash lay just outside the bathroom door, one paw tucked under his chest, the other splayed out awkwardly to the side. His eyes didn't close, but they blinked slowly like a man who'd seen too much and was still trying to believe he was safe. Eliza knelt beside him, towel draped over one arm, a battered first aid kit beside her. Her knees popped in protest, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered over his matted fur for a breath, maybe two. "All right, soldier," she murmured. "This might sting." He didn't move when she touched him. No flinch, no growl, just a soft intake of breath, then stillness. She began with the worst of it. The gash along his haunch, the pad torn open on his left forepaw, the scratches crisscrossing his chest like some unspoken map of violence. As she dabbed antiseptic onto a cotton pad and pressed it gently to the wound, he tensed beneath her hands but didn't pull away. "You've done this before," she said, more to herself than to him. Her hands worked in practiced rhythm press, clean, rap. The muscle memory didn't shake. It had been a decade since she treated a field casualty, but her fingers remembered what her heart tried to forget. By the time she coaxed him into the tub, both of them were soaked. Ash didn't resist. He just let it happen. She lathered a gentle soap into his coat, her touch firm but careful. With each rinse of water, dirt and blood swirled away, circling the drain like stories she wasn't ready to read. Beneath the grime, his coat was a dark sable streaked with ash gray. Fitting, she thought, given the way he had risen from ruin without complaint. That's when she saw it, on the inside of his left ear, partly hidden beneath a healed-over scar. She leaned in, gently parting the fur. K94517. Stamped in faded blue ink, the numbers looked almost like a bruise. A police dog. Maybe retired, maybe discarded, maybe something worse. Eliza didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the numbers. Her breath slowed, heart pressed against the walls of her chest like it wanted to say something, anything, but couldn't find the words. Eventually she whispered, "So they gave you a number too?" Ash didn't react. His head rested against the edge of the tub, eyes half-lidded in exhaustion, or maybe relief. She rinsed the last of the suds off his back, then helped him out with a towel beneath his belly. He didn't struggle, just limped beside her until she settled him onto a folded blanket near the old wood stove. The fire had long since burned out, but the place still held warmth from earlier. She wrapped another blanket over his body and sat beside him on the floor. Rain tapped at the windows again, not the sharp, violent kind. Softer now, like fingers brushing memory. "I don't know who you were before," she said quietly, "but I think I know who you are now." She let the silence settle again, not out of awkwardness, but respect. She understood what it meant to carry things that couldn't be spoken. She had lived decades between the pages of unfinished sentences and swallowed grief. And he, this dog, sat beside her without demanding anything. No explanation, no affection, just presence. She reached over and placed a hand gently on the blanket covering him. His ear twitched once. Then he exhaled, a long, deliberate breath, the kind that sounded like permission. "Okay then," she said. "Ash. That's your name now." He turned slightly, as if testing the word in the air. She didn't expect a tail wag, didn't get one, but she saw the faintest flicker in his brow, like he'd accepted something. An offer, a place. Eliza stood slowly, knees stiff, and turned off the bathroom light behind her. She paused in the doorway, looking back. Ash hadn't moved. His eyes followed her only for a second before closing. And still, he didn't bark. She didn't talk much either, but somehow they understood. Later that evening, she sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black tea gone cold between her hands. The lights were low. The silence was thick but not heavy this time. Just settled. She glanced toward the living room where Ash slept curled near the wood stove, head tucked beneath his paw. For years her silence had been isolation, a wall, a defense. But tonight, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a language, a kind of truth only the broken understand. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza Munro let her shoulders fall, not in defeat, but in rest. The house didn't creak so much as breathe. Eliza sat on the edge of her bed, boots still on, one hand resting on the frame like she needed something to anchor her. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and iodine remnants of the bath she'd given Ash earlier. Outside, the storm had moved on, leaving behind that deep mountain hush that made the night feel too large. Ash lay in the hallway just beyond her open door, curled on an old braided rug, one eye watching. The guest room was still empty. It hadn't been used since Rebecca left for college 2 decades ago. Eliza hadn't brought herself to step in there yet, not since the funeral, not since the call. A half-full cup of chamomile tea sat cooling on the nightstand. She hadn't touched it. Her body was tired in the way only grief and adrenaline could cause, a kind of hollowness that no sleep ever fixed. And still, she couldn't lie down. Not yet. The bed felt too soft, too exposed, too much like surrender. She stared at the ceiling fan spinning above her. 3 slow rotations. 4. Then she turned off the lamp. The darkness didn't rush in. It settled gently, like ash. The scream didn't come from her throat. Not at first. It came from the place behind her ribs, the place that still remembered the crack of mortar, the metallic stench of blood, the feeling of warm flesh going cold beneath her hands. She was back there, somewhere arid, somewhere burning, somewhere where the air itself tasted like fear. Someone was calling her name, over and over, but not in desperation, in blame. "Eliza, you said you'd stay, Eliza, please." She turned, but the tent was empty. Only bodies. Not one moved. Then the siren hit. She gasped, not in the dream, but in her bed lungs locked, hands clawing the sheets like she could hold herself still by force. Her body jerked upright as her chest collapsed into itself. And the scream finally came. It wasn't loud. Not anymore. Not like it had been in the early years. It came out choked and broken, a sound meant for no one but her own demons. She gripped her head between her hands. "No, no, no." Her voice cracked. The past kept swallowing her whole, and then pressure, not panic, not arms, something soft but solid pressed against her chest. A weight. She opened her eyes in the dark. Ash. The dog had come in without a sound. He stood close chest against her knees, head nudging beneath her hand, firm and slow. His ears were low, his breathing deep and rhythmic, and he didn't move away when she gasped again. He leaned in closer. Eliza's hands were still shaking, but she lowered one to rest on his neck. Warm, real. She focused on his breath. In, out, in, out. Not racing, not afraid, just present. Her own breath tried to follow. In, out, in, out. Ash adjusted, settling beside her, his side pressing against her leg like he meant to pin her to reality. His tail didn't wag. He didn't whine. He just stayed. And Eliza let the panic slow. She didn't know how long they sat like that, her with her face buried in the dog's coat, tears cooling against fur, heart slowly learning it didn't have to beat so fast. At some point she whispered, "You came when I didn't even call." Ash didn't react, but somehow he heard her. She exhaled hard. A final tremor left her chest, and with it something unspoken. Not gone, but loosened. She leaned back against the headboard, arms still draped over Ash's shoulders. The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It was earned. The silence of survivors who had nothing left to prove to each other. By morning, the sun came through the window in thin gold slats, cutting lines across the wooden floor. Eliza woke slowly, blinking in confusion before remembering where she was, who she was, and who was beside her. Ash was still there, curled close, snoring gently through his nose. Eliza stared at him for a long moment. It wasn't just that he had stayed. It was how he had stayed. Not frantic, not intrusive, just sure. She'd known soldiers who couldn't sit still in a room for 5 minutes. She'd known therapists who tried too hard, She'd known family members who gave up after she couldn't say what they wanted to hear. But this dog, this broken, scarred, silent creature, had walked into her worst hour and simply laid down beside it. She reached over, fingers brushing the fur behind his ear. "Thank you," she whispered. Ash didn't stir. But maybe he didn't need to, because some comfort doesn't come from touch or voice or logic. Some of it comes from presence. And for the first time in nearly 15 years, Eliza Monroe fell asleep again without fear of what the night might steal. The town of Hollow Ridge was small enough to have only one general store and just big enough to have too many opinions inside it. Eliza stood near the back of Thatcher's grocery, waiting her turn at the checkout. Her hands curled around a carton of eggs and a pack of gauze. She didn't need much. She rarely did. But she couldn't avoid town forever, not with Ash's paw still healing and her pantry down to saltines and 2 cans of baked beans. From the front of the store, murmurs floated through the aisles. "That the Monroe woman? She's back, I heard. Thought she died overseas. Brought a dog with her, huge thing. Didn't look right. Looked like it could rip your throat out." Eliza kept her gaze fixed on the tile floor, cracked in the shape of a lightning bolt. She didn't care what they said. Not anymore. But it still settled under her skin, that old, familiar weight of being seen and misunderstood in the same glance. The line moved forward. She stepped up, placing the items on the counter. Behind the register stood Curtis Thatcher, maybe 50, apron stained with grease and sawdust, beard trimmed to a gray bristle. He gave her a wary nod and began to ring things through. Then he paused. "I heard you've got a dog now," he said, not quite meeting her eye. She didn't answer. "Heard it's one of those retired canines. Big boy. German Shepherd?" Still, she said nothing. Curtis leaned in just slightly. "You sure it's safe, Eliza? I mean, dogs like that, you never know what they've been trained to do, or what they remember." Finally she looked up. Her voice was calm, level. "You mean like people?" Curtis hesitated, unsure if she was joking, probably hoping she was. "I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." She slid the bills across the counter. "But he hasn't bitten anyone yet, which is more than I can say for some of your customers." A chuckle rose from behind her. Someone stifled it. Curtis cleared his throat, bagged the groceries in silence, and handed them to her with a stiff nod. She walked out without another word. The air outside was lighter sun filtered through the branches, dappling the sidewalk with gold and shade. Her truck sat parked beneath a rusted stop sign, windows cracked, engine off. Ash sat in the passenger seat watching her approach. He didn't bark. He never did. Just watched. She opened the door, set the bag beside him, and slid into the driver's seat. "Well," she said, "we're not on the welcome committee's list, but we're still alive. That's a win." Ash tilted his head, almost like he understood sarcasm. Back at the house, Eliza poured food into a ceramic bowl and set it on the floor near the stove. Ash approached without limping, a good sign, but still moved with caution. Like every motion asked permission first. When he finished, he walked to the window and sat down, ears perked. Eliza followed him with her eyes. From her place at the table, she could see what he saw out beyond the glass in the overgrown yard where dandelions had claimed dominion. A single butterfly danced lazily across the field. Bright orange, unbothered by the wind. Ash didn't chase it. He just watched. Still as stone, but alert-like, the butterfly carried something sacred in its wings. Eliza sipped lukewarm coffee and studied him in the reflection. There was something about the way he sat, his back tall, tail curled loosely, eyes tracing the flight with reverence, not like a predator, like a witness. "Why didn't you run?" she asked aloud. Ash didn't move. "You could have, that first night. I left the back door open. You were hurt, but not enough to stay if you didn't want to." Still, he didn't respond. Of course he didn't. But she kept talking anyway. Not because she expected answers, because silence no longer felt like the enemy. It felt like space, like permission. "Someone told me today that you're dangerous." She took another sip, then added, "I told them so am I." Ash shifted slightly, just enough to glance back at her, then returned his gaze to the butterfly. Eliza's eyes softened. He didn't need a leash, didn't need praise. What he needed, what he was something truer, more grounded than most people she knew. A creature who had been through hell and yet chose to sit in the sunlight and watch fragile things flutter. A creature like her. She rose slowly from the table, crossed the room, and lowered herself beside him. Her knees cracked again, but this time she didn't mind. She leaned against the wall, shoulder brushing his fur. The butterfly had vanished, but the peace hadn't, and in that moment, without words, without promise, without expectation, she wondered, who saved who? The rain had returned, not with thunder, but with a steady, gray insistence that soaked everything in silence. Eliza stood under the porch roof, one hand gripping the post as her truck idled at the edge of the gravel drive. Headlights washed over the yard, revealing streaks of falling water and the faint shimmer of wild grass bowing in the wind. She hadn't seen her granddaughter in nearly 6 years, not since Rebecca moved to Portland, chasing a steadier job and a chance at raising Lena far from the shadows of war and memory. Eliza hadn't blamed her. She'd signed every birthday card, sent a few awkward voicemails, kept a photo on the fridge, a little girl with skinned knees and bright eyes, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. But children grow quickly, and pain faster. When the call came, "Your daughter's gone. Car accident. You're listed as next of kin." The numbness returned before the tears. Now, the back door of the truck opened slowly. A girl stepped out, 10 years old, small for her age. Thin arms, soggy hoodie pulled up over her head. Her sneakers hit the mud with a squelch. In one hand she carried a faded purple suitcase that sagged on one wheel. In the other, a sketchbook held like something sacred. She didn't look up, didn't scan the porch for a familiar face. She just stood there, rain dripping off her hood, shoulders drawn tight, like she expected the world to fall apart again at any moment. Eliza didn't move, not yet. The girl looked thinner than she remembered, paler too. But it wasn't the physical changes that struck her. It was the way her eyes looked older than her hands, like she'd skipped past childhood and landed somewhere between grief and guardedness. The social worker Rachel, or maybe Rebecca too, stepped out from the driver's side, umbrella in hand. She said something to the girl, but Lena didn't answer. "Grandma Eliza's here," the woman called gently toward the porch. "Why don't we go say hello?" Eliza felt a strange tightness in her chest. "I'm not ready for this." But she stepped forward anyway. 2 slow steps down the porch. The rain splashed against her boots as she approached. Lena looked up at last. Her face was thinner, eyes rimmed with the kind of silence that doesn't scream. It just sits there, heavy and unmoving. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just held Eliza's gaze like it was a test. Eliza didn't speak, didn't reach. And that's when Ash appeared. He hadn't been on the porch a second ago. But now he moved forward from the shadow of the steps, his gait cautious but steady. His tail didn't wag. His ears stayed neutral. He didn't bark. He just came forward, stopping 3 feet from the girl, nose raised slightly to catch her scent beneath the rain. Lena's eyes widened, not in fear, in recognition. The kind of moment where something broken inside a child recognizes something equally broken, but kind. She bent down slowly, as if remembering how to kneel, and placed her sketchbook in the mud. Then, without asking, she pressed her forehead against Ash's. No words. Ash stood still. The moment held. The rain didn't matter. The silence didn't matter. For a few long seconds, time forgot how to move. The social worker finally cleared her throat. "She's quiet. Since the funeral. It's been hard. She's been drawing instead of talking." Eliza barely heard her. Lena stood back up and picked up her sketchbook. Mud clung to the edges now, but she didn't flinch. She just looked at Eliza with that same unreadable face. And Eliza, who had once tied a tourniquet with one hand in the dark, who had faced death without blinking, felt utterly unprepared for the fragile defiance in her granddaughter's gaze. "You don't have to come inside yet," Eliza said, voice low. "You can sit with him if you want." Lena nodded once. She sat cross-legged on the porch, Ash beside her, the sketchbook in her lap. The truck pulled away minutes later. No one waved. Inside, Eliza stood behind the screen door, watching the girl through the fogged glass. She didn't know what to say, didn't know where to start, but somehow the silence didn't feel so unfamiliar anymore. Ash shifted his weight, leaning slightly into the child's side. Lena looked down at him, then opened her sketchbook and began to draw. That night, Eliza placed an extra blanket in the guest room. Fresh sheets. An old stuffed bear she'd found in the attic still intact after all these years. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her hand resting on the knob, heart full of names she hadn't said out loud since the funeral. Down the hall, she heard the soft thump of Ash's paws, a quiet whisper of something being rebuilt, something slow, something real. The days grew quieter, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the words hadn't found their shape yet. Lena didn't speak much, not to Eliza, not to herself. She moved through the old farmhouse like a ghost made of bone and breath light on her feet, careful with her presence. Always watching, always clutching that sketchbook like it held the pieces she didn't know how to carry any other way. Eliza gave her space. There were no questions about school, no mention of her mother's name, no forced smiles, just simple routines, warm meals, fresh laundry, and a dog who never left her side. Ash had adopted the girl with the quiet ease of a creature who understood sorrow without needing its details. He followed her from room to room, his steps soundless on the wood floor. At night, he laid across her doorway like a sentry. In the morning, he was the first thing she looked for. Sometimes, Eliza would peek around the hallway corner and find Lena curled on the rug beside him, sketching by the pale light coming through the window. She never interrupted. Some wounds didn't want the bandage pulled off. They just wanted company while they healed. One afternoon, as wind threaded through the pines outside, Eliza passed by the living room and paused. Lena sat by the window, knees drawn to her chest, pencil scratching gently across paper. Ash was stretched beside her, nose resting on one paw, his tail twitching every now and then at some invisible sound beyond the glass. On the coffee table sat a growing stack of drawings, some loose, some still bound in the book. Eliza approached slowly, careful not to disturb the moment. Lena didn't stop her. She reached for one of the sketches. It was Ash, curled beside the back door, his ears alert even in sleep. Another showed him sitting in the field, head tilted at a passing bird. The detail was stunning, not just anatomically but emotionally. Every line carried weight, like Lena was drawing what she felt, not just what she saw. Another showed Eliza, standing at the stove, one hand resting on the counter, eyes staring out the window, Ash at her feet. Lena had drawn herself in the background, small, quiet, watching. It caught Eliza by the throat. She picked up the final sketch in the pile. 3 figures, all turned away from the viewer. No faces, just shadows, Eliza, Ash, and Lena, standing in a field beneath a storm cloud. Rain came down in angled lines, but the 3 of them stood close, almost touching. And at the top, in shaky pencil strokes, Lena had written, "Not alone. Not really." Eliza didn't speak. She sat down beside the girl, setting the sketch gently back on the table. For a long time, they just listened to the wind rattle the windows. Ash lifted his head slightly but didn't move. Then Lena, without looking up, reached into the sketchbook again, tore out a clean page. She drew slowly, methodically. Eliza didn't watch. She just sat there, the weight in her chest shifting, breaking apart like ice cracking under slow warmth. When the drawing was done, Lena turned it toward her. This one was different. It showed the same 3 figures herself, Eliza and Ash. But this time, their backs were to the rain. The storm cloud still loomed above, but in Lena's hand she held an umbrella. Small, shaky, but open. Eliza blinked. Something in her stomach twisted in that deep, invisible way grief often moves. She reached over and, with a hand that rarely touched anything without purpose, brushed a strand of wet hair from Lena's forehead. "You're stronger than you look," she said softly. Lena looked up for the first time that day, and almost smiled. That night, after the dishes had been washed and Ash had made his slow rounds of the house, Eliza stood at the threshold of the guest room. Lena was already tucked in, the sketchbook beside her pillow. "Need the door open?" Eliza asked. Lena nodded once. Ash curled at the foot of the bed. Eliza turned to leave, but paused. "I saw your drawings," she said gently. "They're beautiful." No reply, just a small shifting under the blanket. "I like the one with the umbrella." Lena's voice came, quiet as breath. "Me too." And for the first time, Eliza realized something. Maybe it wasn't her job to fix this child. Maybe her only job was to stand beside her in the rain, long enough for Lena to remember she could hold something up against the storm. The clink of ceramic was the only sound in the kitchen. Eliza set down the mismatched plates, 2 faded blue, 1 chipped at the rim. The dining table, once meant for 6, now only held 2 chairs close together at one end. The others had long since been stacked in the corner, forgotten like the dinner parties they once supported. Lena sat across from her, feet swinging just above the floor, hands folded in her lap. Ash lay between them, chin resting on the worn floorboards, eyes flickering between their faces and the occasional flick of Eliza's spoon. The stew was simple potatoes, carrots, some meat she'd found in the freezer, thawed and softened with time. It wasn't gourmet, but it was warm. It filled the room with something close to comfort. Eliza took a sip of tea and winced slightly. Too strong. She had left the bag in too long again. She caught Lena watching her, curious, not fearful, just quietly studying. "What?" Eliza asked, more out of habit than annoyance. Lena hesitated, then looked down at Ash, who had just shifted slightly in his sprawl beneath the table. "He doesn't bark," she said softly. It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "No," she said, setting her mug down gently. "He doesn't." Lena looked up. "Why?" Eliza thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe he doesn't need to." Ash exhaled through his nose, as if agreeing. Lena nodded once, then went back to eating. The silence after that didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. Later that evening, the dishes were washed, dried, and stacked. The air had turned cooler, but not cold, the kind of air that carried memory in its breath. Soft winds, long shadows. Eliza opened the porch door and stepped out with 2 chipped mugs. One had tea, the other hot cocoa with too many marshmallows already beginning to melt into a white foam. Lena followed without a word, sketchbook tucked under her arm. She didn't ask why Eliza had made the cocoa. She didn't ask why Eliza handed it to her without ceremony. She just sat. Ash followed, stretching before settling between them, his body warm, weighty, grounding. The 3 of them sat there, watching the world dim. Fireflies blinked in and out of the tall grass like sparks that had forgotten they weren't stars. Somewhere, far off, a coyote called. The trees whispered secrets to one another in a language too old for human ears. Eliza sipped her tea and stared out across the field, her eyes tracking the horizon. "Your mom used to sit out here," she said, the words soft and without preamble, "before she got too busy for sunsets." Lena didn't reply. But she didn't retreat either. "She always wanted to leave this place," Eliza added. "Said it was too quiet." Lena glanced at Ash. "I like the quiet." Eliza smiled, faint and tired. "Yeah, me too." "Now." A pause. Lena took a small sip of her cocoa, then said, almost to herself, "She yelled a lot at the end." Eliza's breath caught. Not because she hadn't expected that truth, but because it had been spoken aloud in the night between a cup of cocoa and a dog that didn't bark. "She was hurting," Eliza said gently. "Not an excuse, just the truth." Lena traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "Ash doesn't yell." "No," Eliza murmured. "He listens." The girl leaned slightly into the dog's side, the way she always did when words started to fail her. Eliza didn't press. Instead, she looked at the cracked porch rail, the soft flicker of a firefly clinging to it, and the mug warming her hands. "I broke this cup," she said suddenly, lifting the mug. "Back in '99, dropped it on the kitchen floor. Thought I'd throw it out, but your grandpa glued it back together." Lena turned toward her. "You can still see the line," Eliza said, running her finger along the jagged seam. "But it holds. Still does its job." Lena looked down at her own mug. "Mine has a chip," Eliza nodded. "Most good things do." Ash let out a small grunt and shifted closer to Lena's feet, eyes drifting shut. For a long while they didn't speak. Didn't need to. Three shadows sat on a porch as the night rose around them, one carrying old scars, one carrying fresh ones, and one who simply carried them both. And in that stillness, something subtle shifted, not loud enough to be called healing, but enough to feel like the beginning of it. Eliza looked down at her granddaughter, silhouetted in the fading light, and whispered without thinking, "We'll figure this out, kiddo. You, me, and the quiet one." Lena didn't answer, but her head leaned gently against Ash's shoulder, and in that small, deliberate gesture, Eliza felt something unlock. Not a door, not a future, just a little more room inside her own chest. The grocery store was small, just 3 aisles and a dusty corner where the radio always played slightly too loud. Wooden crates lined with local produce, a cooler buzzing like it was dying. The bell above the door jingled the same tired chime every time someone walked in. Eliza hated this place, but she came anyway, because the milk here tasted like real milk, and the clerk didn't ask questions unless it was about weather. She pushed the cart slowly, her left hand resting on the handle, her right unconsciously hovering near Lena's shoulder. Lena walked beside her, quiet as always, sketchbook clutched tight like it was armor. Ash padded silently behind, leash loosely looped around Eliza's wrist. Not that he needed it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like distant helicopters. The air was too still, too clean. Eliza reached for a can of soup when it happened. A broom, carelessly propped against a shelf by the cleaning boy, slipped. It hit the ground with a sharp, sudden clatterwood on tile, fast and final. The noise cracked like a shot, and everything stopped. Her breath hitched. The aisle disappeared. In its place, heat, smoke, screaming, the thwump of rotors overhead, the sharp scent of antiseptic and blood, a boy's voice choking, calling for a medic, hands slippery with life pouring out. The shelf in front of her blurred, her knees locked. Shoulders went rigid. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. A scream tried to claw its way up her throat, but it never made it. Then movement. Ash. The German shepherd stepped forward in an instant, pressing his body into the space between her and the startled shoppers down the aisle. His eyes locked ahead, focused, protective. One paw ever so slightly raised, tail low, head level. A sentinel. A wall of fur and instinct and memory. Lena had frozen too, but only for a second. Her eyes darted up to Eliza's face, pale, hollow, that 1,000-yard stare again. Without a word, Lena slipped her small hand into Eliza's, not pulling, not guiding, just there. Contact, anchor. Eliza blinked. Once, twice. The lights flickered back into focus. The tinny music returned, and just like that she was back in the store, standing in front of canned soup, hand trembling over chicken noodle. She exhaled shakily, a sound like leaves rustling against dry stone. Ash glanced up at her once, then turned slightly to press his side against her leg. Still here, still watching. The clerk poked his head around the corner. "You okay, ma'am?" Lena squeezed her hand. Eliza found her voice, but it felt like gravel. "Yeah, just dropped something. No harm." The clerk gave a polite nod, disappeared. Eliza crouched slowly, her knees creaking. She rested a hand on Ash's back. "Good boy," she murmured. It wasn't loud, but it was the first time Lena had ever heard her say it out loud. Ash's ear twitched in acknowledgement. They stood there for a long time, just 3 shadows in a corner of a too-bright store. Eventually, Lena whispered, "It sounded like a gun." Eliza nodded. It did. Lena didn't ask more. Didn't have to. They walked home without another word, Lena still holding her hand. Ash, trotting slightly ahead now, glancing back every few steps like a soldier walking point. When they reached the front steps, the sky was beginning to turn the color of old bruises, purple and gold and gray. Eliza paused, looked down at the girl beside her, at the dog watching them both. I used to think I was alone in this, she said softly, almost like it wasn't meant to be heard. But I'm starting to think maybe I'm not. Ash sat. Lena leaned her head against Eliza's arm. No one said anything, but it was understood. The house breathed differently at night, when the lights were low and the walls no longer had to hold anyone's weight, when footsteps softened into silence and memories came out of the corners. It was almost midnight when Eliza passed by the living room. A small lamp glowed dimly on the side table left on for Lena, though the girl never asked for it. The fire in the hearth had long since gone to embers. Ash lay curled near the front door, as he always did, eyes half-lidded but alert like a heartbeat keeping watch. Eliza rubbed the side of her temple, fatigue whispering behind her eyes. She stepped carefully, trying not to disturb the peace that had taken all day to build. And then she saw it. Lena's sketchbook, left on the rug, open its spine bent slightly, as though placed there in a rush. She paused. It wasn't like Lena to leave it behind. She picked it up, intending to close it, to set it on the girl's small desk and leave it untouched. But then she saw what was on the page, and her breath caught. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a memory. Their memory, that moment, rendered in pencil strokes too sharp for a child, too emotional for words. There was Eliza drawn collapsed on the floor of the store, her hands trembling, her figure small and hunched, surrounded by towering shelves and vague, faceless shadows. The chaos around her was reduced to lines and motion blur, but the emotion was crystal clear. Ash stood between her and the world, eyes focused, muscles taut, a sentinel. And behind him, Lena, drawn with delicate care, eyes large, one tear mid-fall, hand reaching forward. But what undid Eliza completely wasn't the art. It wasn't even the memory. It was the line of writing at the bottom of the page, written in pencil with a slight wobble. Please don't go away again. She stared at the words like they might vanish if she blinked too hard. And something in her chest gave out, quietly, like a chair collapsing under its own weight. She sank to the floor, the sketchbook trembling in her hands. She thought she had hidden it well, her fear, her spirals, the cracks that spread under the surface of her quiet. But children had a way of seeing what adults masked. Lena had seen, and drawn, and begged with graphite instead of words. A whisper escaped Eliza's lips. I didn't mean to disappear. Ash stirred at the sound, lifting his head. He didn't move closer, just watched from the shadows. And in the dim glow of the lamp, Eliza sat there cross-legged on the rug, the sketchbook open in her lap, her fingers gently brushing the edge of the drawing like it was something fragile, sacred. She didn't hear Lena's soft steps approaching, didn't realize the girl had woken up, until she felt a blanket draped over her shoulders. Eliza turned. Lena stood there in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, blinking. Their eyes met, and for a long time, no one said a word. Finally, Eliza held the sketchbook up. Did you mean this? For me to see? Lena hesitated, then nodded, barely. Eliza swallowed. I thought I was protecting you by not showing you the worst of me. You weren't, Lena whispered, voice rasped by sleep and truth. You were just leaving me alone in it." The honesty hit like thunder, soft but seismic. Eliza closed the sketchbook gently, set it aside. "I'm still learning," she admitted, "how to stay." Lena looked down at her feet. "Me too." Ash got up then, moved quietly to their side. He sat between them, pressing his body gently against their legs. A warm, silent bridge. Eliza reached out and tucked a lock of Lena's hair behind her ear. "Next time it gets hard, maybe we fall together. But we get back up too." Lena nodded again, this time a little firmer. She sat beside Eliza on the rug, the blanket stretching across both of their shoulders. And Ash lay down, chin resting on Eliza's knee, eyes finally closing, as if for the first time in days he could sleep knowing his two humans had found each other again. Outside, wind pressed softly against the windows. Inside, three souls stayed where they were, not because they had to, but because this time they chose to, together. The attic smelled like cedar and silence. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight, slicing through the slatted window, suspended like memories that had nowhere else to go. Eliza hadn't opened the old chest in years. It sat tucked beneath a stack of folded quilts, tucked behind time. Its brass latch was dull with age, and the hinges let out a soft groan as she lifted the lid. Inside, colors, ribbons, dozens of them, twisted, curled, some faded by sunlight, others still as bright as laughter. She touched the first one, sky blue, with frayed ends. It had once lived in the braid of a girl who ran faster than the wind and sang to thunderstorms like they were friends. Her daughter. Eliza's hand stilled on the edge of the box. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. Not this time. Downstairs, she could hear the soft scratch of Lena's pencil on paper, the occasional thump of Ash's tail when she moved too close. Eliza reached in and lifted a ribbon-deep red soft from years of wear. She rolled it between her fingers, felt the ghost of small hands tugging at her hair, asking if this one matched her superhero cape. She closed the lid gently, as if not to wake anything inside. When she came back down, Lena was crouched beside Ash, sketchbook forgotten, drawing invisible lines on the floor with her finger. Eliza stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "I used to tie these in her hair," she said softly. Lena looked up. Eliza held out the red ribbon. She called this one her fire ribbon, said it made her brave. Lena didn't say anything, just reached out and took it like it was made of glass. There was something careful about the way she handled it, deliberate, gentle, as if she understood it carried more than just thread. "Do you want to give it to him?" Eliza asked. Lena looked at Ash. The dog was sprawled on his side, eyes closed, but his ears twitched as if he were listening. Lena nodded. She knelt beside him, hands steady. Ash blinked up at her, made no move. He seemed to understand this was something sacred. Lena tied the ribbon around his collar, looping it once, then twice, the ends falling just beneath his throat like a medal. "There," she whispered. "This one's for Mom." Ash licked her hand once, then rested his head on her knee. Eliza sat beside them. No one spoke for a long time. The ribbon shimmered slightly when the light hit it, catching the glow like it still held fire. Eliza reached out, ran her hand along Ash's back. "She would have liked you," she said. "You both showed up when I forgot how to ask." Lena leaned her head on Ash's shoulder. "She sounds like someone who didn't leave easy." "She didn't," Eliza whispered. "She just stayed in different ways." They sat like that. 3 figures on the hardwood floor, bound not by blood but by grief and grace, and now by ribbon. Later, when Lena picked up her sketchbook again, the page she started was simple. Ash, sitting tall in front of the house, his eyes steady, a ribbon fluttering at his chest, and behind him, two figures, one carrying scars, one carrying silence, both learning how to carry each other. The rain had stopped, but the house still held its rhythm. Drips from the porch gutter tapped like a quiet metronome. Outside, the earth steamed softly under a gray sky. Inside, the floor creaked under Lena's socks as she tiptoed through the hallway, sketchbook tucked under one arm, a mug of cocoa in the other. Ash lay sprawled on the rug, a sentinel at peace, his ribbon still tied at the collar, reddened from dampness but firm, as if it had grown roots in him. Lena passed the bookshelf by the back wall. She'd walked past it dozens of times, always glancing, never touching, but something today made her pause. A blue folder peeked out from between an old gardening guide and a history of riverboats. She tugged at the edge. A few dust particles danced off the spine like the pages hadn't been disturbed in years. When she opened it, the cover made her stop breathing. K9 Tactical Unit Training Manual, Edition 3. The badge insignia was faded but still recognizable. The pages smelled like old sweat, leather, and sun. There were notes in the margins. A red-inked "Sit" means trust, scrawled beside diagrams. Photos of lean German shepherds mid-leap, muzzles, commands. Lena held it like a relic, like a letter sent from the past to the present. She didn't knock when she walked into the kitchen. Eliza looked up from the sink, hands wrist-deep in suds, sleeves rolled to the elbows, jaw tight with thought. "I found something," Lena said. She placed the manual on the table. Slowly, like it might break. Eliza froze. Her eyes fell on the emblem, and for a moment her entire face went still. Then something flickered behind her gaze. A memory, or maybe a warning. "Where did you get that?" she asked, voice low. Lena motioned to the bookshelf. "I didn't know it was real," she said. "Like the things he did, what they taught them to do." Eliza walked over and thumbed through the pages, eyes scanning old annotations she barely remembered writing. Her handwriting was sharp, soldier-like. There were coffee stains, dried corners from field work. She stared at a photo two-handlers and a K9 named Rook, jaws locked mid-bark. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Then Lena asked, "What if we trained Ash together?" Eliza blinked. She hadn't expected that. Lena shifted her weight, uncertain. "I mean, not like for real police stuff, but maybe just enough. Commands, trust. He already listens without us asking." Ash, as if summoned by his own intuition, padded into the room. He sat beside Lena, head tilted, silent, watching. Eliza looked at the dog, then the girl, then the manual, a triangle of weight, held in invisible threads. Her instinct was no. She wanted to say it. Training meant opening boxes she had kept shut. Orders, routines, repetition that brought back tents, boots, gunfire. She didn't want to hear herself bark commands again, didn't want Ash to feel like another tool. But Ash wasn't that, and neither was Lena. Eliza closed the manual softly. "Why?" she asked. Lena hesitated, then said, "Because he needs something that's just his, and maybe we do too." The room felt suddenly bigger, quieter. Ash nudged Eliza's hand with his nose. Not begging, not pleading, just there. She exhaled. "Okay," she said. Lena's face lit up, not loud, not wide-eyed joy, but the kind of light that glows from the inside, quiet and steady, the kind that means thank you when words still feel fragile. That night, they sat on the porch with the manual between them. Ash lay at their feet, eyes on the tree line, ears twitching at every small rustle. Eliza opened to page 1. "Let's start with the name," she said. "A proper command starts with calling him." Lena leaned in. "He already knows that part." Ash looked up. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza smiled, not because she remembered, but because something new was beginning. The fog came in low that morning, curling around the fence posts, like fingers not ready to let go. The yard disappeared into a world made of breath and silence, each blade of grass wrapped in dew like a kept secret. Eliza zipped her jacket and stood at the threshold. The old training manual lay open on the kitchen table behind her, weighted by a chipped mug and a half-unpeeled clementine. Outside, Ash stood alert, his breath ghosting into the morning air. Lena had already traced a few diagrams into chalk on the patio, half erased now by mist. Heel, sit, stay. She'd practiced them in whispers the night before, pointing at the sketches and mimicking the hand signals in the mirror, like a musician tuning an old instrument she never learned to play. Eliza stepped into the cold. Each footfall seemed to sink a little deeper into something unspoken, not fear exactly, not grief either. Just the feeling of stepping toward something she hadn't dared to want in a long time. Ash padded over, ears pricked, tail still but not tense. She stopped in front of him and took a breath. The fog swirled between them, soft and invisible. Her voice came out low, steady. "Sit." Ash hesitated for half a second. Then his hind legs folded like old instincts stretching awake after a long hibernation. His gaze stayed locked on hers, not rigid but grounded. Eliza didn't smile, not yet. But something in her chest shifted. She raised her hand in a subtle curve, 2 fingers, slow sweep. "Stay." He didn't move, not even a blink. A crow cawed in the distance. Somewhere beyond the fog, a neighbor's wind chime tinkled like memory fragments. Ash remained still, rooted like he belonged to the silence itself. She turned and walked 5 steps back. 1, 2, 3. The last time she had done this, she'd been in uniform, boots pressed into dry soil, heart ticking beneath Kevlar. A handler's walk was sacred. It meant trust not just in the dog, but in herself. "Come." Ash rose and approached, not fast, not perfect. He tilted slightly to the left, like he wasn't sure if this was training or just walking toward the person who'd washed his wounds and didn't ask questions. Still, he stopped exactly where she had stood, right beside her, not ahead, not behind. Eliza reached down and touched his shoulder. No treats, no clicker. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something real had passed between them. Lena clapped from the porch. It was barely audible, as if she wasn't sure if celebration was allowed here yet. But her grin was wide, and her fingers gripped the porch rail like she was watching the start of something sacred. They did it again, and again. Sit, stay, come. Each command like dusting off a word that once meant safety. Ash stumbled once when they practiced heel. He circled wide, overshot the turn, and bumped Eliza's knee with his shoulder. She almost apologized, then remembered she didn't need to. "Again," she said. And they did. By noon, the fog had begun to lift. The field stretched open in soft pastels. Wet branches glistened in the sun, and the outlines of trees returned like old friends, shy to reintroduce themselves. They took a walk down the gravel road. No leash, just rhythm. Ash walked at her side, sometimes pausing to sniff the air, ears flicking toward invisible birdsong. Lena walked behind them, drawing in her sketchbook as they moved, each step recorded in curved lines and soft pencil dust. For the first time in years, Eliza felt the day move with her instead of past her. There was no goal, no ticking clock, but still there was direction. They passed the old creek bend, where wildflowers still fought their way through bramble and vine. Ash sat on command and stayed while Eliza stepped into the tall grass to examine something glinting in the dirt, a child's broken keychain, faded pink and chipped. When she turned back, Ash was still watching, still waiting. Back at the house, Lena set her sketchbook on the steps and looked at Eliza. "He's getting good," she said. Eliza wiped mud from her boot with a stick. "He's remembering." Then quieter. "So am I." Ash flopped onto the porch, tongue lolling, chest rising and falling in calm cadence. Eliza looked out into the afternoon haze and realized something strange. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living, even if it was just a few commands, a few quiet walks, a few shared glances with a dog who understood the language of wounds. There was still grief, still weight. But now, there was also movement, and that was enough. The porch creaked beneath their feet like an old voice trying to remember a lullaby. Dusk had melted into the trees, pulling long shadows across the railing. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, flickering in and out of existence like moments they weren't sure they were allowed to hold on to. Eliza sat with her legs curled under her, mug of tea between her palms, still too hot to drink. The chipped ceramic had a hairline crack running through the side, but it hadn't broken. Not yet. Lena was sitting on the steps, knees pulled to her chest, chin resting just above them. Her sketchbook lay open beside her, a half-finished drawing of Ash mid-leap, catching a ball in mid-air. No outlines, just motion. The kind that you could feel in your ribs. Ash lay sprawled between them, snoring softly, his chest rising with a weightlessness that only trust could bring. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't demand anything, just shared space and breath and the occasional creak of wood. Then Lena spoke, soft as mist. "There's a dog competition in 2 weeks." Eliza blinked. "What?" "A canine showcase," Lena said, brushing a curl behind her ear. "Down in Northfield, obedience, obstacle runs, handler trust drills, that kind of thing." Eliza smiled, but it was brittle at the edges. "That's ambitious." Lena shrugged, then nodded toward Ash. "He could win?" Ash stirred at the mention of his name, one ear flicking toward them before settling again into sleep. Eliza took a slow sip from her mug, letting the heat ground her. She stared out into the darkening field where the fog sometimes crept and sometimes fled. "That's not what this was for," she said eventually. "We didn't train for trophies." Lena turned her head, watching her in that quiet, almost feral way, like someone who'd learned to read people by the weight of their silences, not the shape of their words. "I know," Lena whispered. Not for the trophy." Eliza didn't reply. Lena reached for her sketchbook and flipped to a new page. Her pencil moved in slow, looping strokes, not drawing, just making circles, like her thoughts needed somewhere to land before they took form. Then, after a while, "I just thought, maybe it's time you stood in front of people again. Not hiding, not behind anyone, just you, him, together." The words slipped into Eliza's chest like a small spark, soft, but hot enough to scare her. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, not pitied, not saluted. Seen. Her fingers clenched around the mug's handle. She remembered the last time she'd worn her uniform, the ceremony, the flag, the folded letter, the way everyone had looked at her like she was the one who hadn't made it back. "I don't know if I can," she said. Lena didn't push. She just kept drawing. "You already are." The breeze carried the smell of pine and old rain. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called, once distant, lonely. Ash shifted and placed his head on Eliza's foot, warm, steady. His way of saying, "I'm here, still here." Eliza stared down at him. "What if I freeze?" she asked, more to herself than anyone else. "What if I fall apart out there?" "Then we'll be there," Lena said. "Me, him, your cracked teacup crew." That made Eliza chuckle. It was a surprised sound, raw and small and almost unfamiliar. She covered her mouth as if laughter were something sacred. Lena kept drawing. Eliza didn't ask what it was. But later that night, after Lena had gone to bed and Ash followed with the soft rhythm of paws on wood, Eliza peeked at the sketchbook left open on the step. It was a simple image, Eliza, standing with her hand resting gently on Ash's head. No medals, no stage. Just a quiet confidence, like the kind that comes not from winning, but from choosing to show up. Above them, Lena had written just one thing. Sometimes being brave just means going where people can see you again. The arena hummed with a nervous kind of electricity, the kind that crackled just beneath the skin. The bleachers were packed, people shifting in their seats, rustling programs, adjusting phones. The sound system popped with static, then blared an announcer's voice that bounced off the rafters like it had nowhere else to go. Eliza stood just inside the tunnel entrance, 1 foot on the threshold of the ring. The floor ahead of her gleamed under the blinding white lights, too polished, too open, like a stage without curtains. No place to hide. Her throat felt like it had forgotten how to swallow. Ash sat beside her, calm, unmoving. His ears twitched at the sudden cheer from the other side of the stadium. But he didn't flinch, didn't shift. His presence was quiet, weighty, like a stone pressed into the palm, cold at first, but anchoring. She could hear the muffled thump of her own heartbeat against the noise. Or maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe it was the heartbeat of the place itself, thick with memories and adrenaline and echoes of commands barked by people who'd trained dogs like Ash long before she ever had. Someone passed behind her, brushing too close. She winced. "It's just a crowd," she told herself. But it wasn't. Not to her. To her, the sound of feet on concrete still meant someone running from something. The flash of bright light meant searchlights in a hostile place. The sharp echo of a microphone meant orders shouted over gunfire. The walls began to tilt. Her breath quickened. Her hand tightened around Ash's leash, more for her sake than his. Her vision blurred at the edges, tunneling in toward the center, toward the exit. Run. Run now. Then she felt it. A nudge. Ash had leaned his weight into her leg, not forcefully, just enough to be felt, just enough to say, "I'm here. Come back." Eliza blinked. Once, twice, and then, through the blur, she caught a color. Red, bright red like a ribbon. Lena, sitting in the third row center aisle, had tied it in her hair, a thin little flare of stubborn color in the sea of gray. She was on her feet now, standing tall, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. When their eyes met, Lena lifted her hand and gave a small, simple thumbs up. No words, just a gesture. But it hit like thunder. Eliza exhaled, long, shaky. She looked down at Ash. He looked back, tongue out slightly, tail giving a single, quiet wag. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's walk." And they did, step by step, into the blinding white ring, under lights that had once felt like spotlights for judgment, but now just felt like day. The noise didn't go away, but it shifted, softened, became something distant, like a wave she no longer had to fight. In the center of the ring, she gave a soft command. "Sit." Ash did, flawless. A smattering of polite claps came from somewhere behind the judge's table. Eliza didn't care. That wasn't why she was here. She walked Ash through the drill basic obedience. Heel, stay, turn, return. It wasn't perfect. His turn was a bit wide, his stay slightly eager, but he was focused, steady. At one point, someone dropped a clipboard behind them. The noise echoed like a shot. Eliza flinched. Ash did not. He turned slightly, placed himself between her and the sound. Didn't growl, didn't react, just positioned. The judge nodded, making a note. But Eliza wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at Ash and wondering, not for the first time, if this dog had saved her more than she'd ever saved him. The routine ended. There was a pause. Applause. Polite. Unsure. Then Lena stood and clapped louder. It was awkward, offbeat, and completely unself-conscious. A few people turned to look. Some joined in. Eliza bowed her head slightly, not as a performer, but as someone returning a gesture of thanks. As she walked Ash off the ring, she passed the crowd. "Good dog," someone whispered. "Strong form. She's the vet, right? From the 11th Division?" She didn't answer, but her shoulders didn't shrink. Outside the tunnel, in the quiet again, Lena ran to meet them. "You didn't freeze," Lena said. Eliza looked down at her hands. "I almost did." "But you didn't," Lena said. "You stood there, where everyone could see you." Ash nosed Lena's hand, tail wagging. Lena smiled and looked at him. "And you look at you. Still got it." Eliza knelt, rubbing Ash behind the ears. "Didn't matter what the score was," she said, more to herself than them. "We already won." The whistle blew short, sharp, final. The crowd settled into a hush. Eliza stood just outside the ring's painted white circle, one hand resting lightly on Ash's shoulder. The floor beneath them was synthetic turf, but it might as well have been a battlefield. Her boots felt too loud against it, her hands too exposed. She glanced to the side where the judge gave a nod. The cue. "Let's go," she whispered, but not to the crowd. To him. Ash moved. Not like a dog performing tricks, but like a soldier returning to familiar ground. His pace matched hers perfectly. No leash, no second command. Just understanding. The kind that came not from obedience, but from pain shared and survived. The routine began with a pivot. Turn, Eliza said. Ash turned sharply on his heel, aligned with her left leg, sat. There was a pause, then scattered clapping, but it barely registered. Eliza took in a shaky breath. Her chest still carried the remnants of the arena's echo from earlier. It vibrated behind her ribs like a second pulse. "Forward," she said. They stepped in sync. Her voice trembled like porcelain under strain, but it carried. She noticed it. The moment her own voice didn't break. It shook, yes, but it stood, just like she was doing now. "Sit." Ash did. She stepped away from him, hands steady, though her heart wasn't. It was hammering in her chest like it had something left to prove. "Stay." She walked 10 paces ahead, turned. Ash didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shift of weight, just that steady, silent presence, like he was holding something together for both of them. In the back row, Lena clutched her sketchbook so tightly the edges were beginning to curl. Her legs kicked nervously, but her eyes never left the ring. Eliza raised her hand. "Come." Ash bolted, not with recklessness, but with grace. Like he wanted to get back to her, not out of duty, out of knowing. That if he ran to her, maybe the past would stop chasing her, just for a moment. The crowd gasped just a little as Ash skidded into a perfect front sit. Someone near the judge's table murmured, "Beautiful." Eliza crouched, touched his chest. She wasn't supposed to, not in this segment. But no one stopped her. Because some gestures don't break rules, they redefine them. She stood, moved to the next portion agility. The hurdles weren't high, but they looked like mountains. Not for Ash, for her. Each command she gave, her voice grew steadier. "Over." "Down." "Circle." Ash obeyed, fluid like water, yet grounded like stone. At one point, he hesitated, just slightly at the last jump. Eliza didn't raise her voice, didn't repeat. She simply whispered, "I'm still here." And that was enough. He jumped, landed, waited, not just for a cue, but for her breath, her rhythm, her pulse. The final challenge was recall through distraction, a row of tennis balls and dropped treats. A test of loyalty. Ash sat at one end. Eliza stood at the other, hand behind her back. She looked across the lane and thought about Afghanistan, about the first time she met Ash in the desert. Dust in his eyes, blood on his side. A dog no one could calm until she crouched, whispered, "I won't leave you." Now, years later, they faced another kind of gauntlet. She swallowed hard. "Come." Ash moved. The noise from the crowd faded. There was only the sound of paws against turf. A ball rolled, tugged slightly by the breeze from the AC vent. Ash looked at it, just for a fraction of a second. Then his eyes locked on her. He passed the treats. He passed the noise. He passed the fear that had once caged them both. And he stopped, inches from her, sat, tail wagging once. Eliza didn't smile. She breathed, deeply, and it didn't hurt. The arena broke into applause. Judges scribbled notes. Someone snapped a photo. Lena stood, arms in the air, but Eliza didn't move. She reached down, resting her palm on Ash's head. "You remembered," she whispered. Ash leaned into her touch. The trophy wasn't heavy, but in Eliza's hands it might as well have been made of memory and weightless hope. Polished silver, modest design, a simple engraving, Obedience Champion, Regional Trials. The announcer's voice faded beneath the thunder of the crowd. A sea of strangers clapping, whistling, rising to their feet. For Ash, for her, for something they didn't know the full story of, but somehow felt. Lena, small but beaming, stood at the edge of the ring, cupping her hands around her mouth and shouting something, words swallowed by the swell of noise, but the joy in her face said enough. Ash stood beside Eliza, chest heaving gently, tongue lolling with that proud, unbothered ease. His coat shimmered under the stadium lights. His ears were alert, but his eyes kept flicking back to her, as if waiting to be sure she was still breathing through it all. She was. Barely. Eliza held the trophy up, half a smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. It felt foreign, but not unwelcome. A cameraman crouched nearby, snapping photo after photo. Click, flash, click, flash. The ring shimmered with camera lenses and confetti, but Ash didn't look at any of that. His gaze drifted elsewhere, past the crowd, beyond the applause. Eliza followed his eyes, sensing something shift in the atmosphere, like a sudden gust in a room with no windows. And there he was, a man in a dark overcoat, standing in the back row beneath the bleachers' awning, half in shadow, half under the flickering edge of a spotlight that didn't quite reach him. His face was sharply drawn angles that didn't soften with age, only sharpened, hair graying at the temples, hands in his pockets, motionless, not clapping, not blinking, just watching. Like someone witnessing the return of a ghost he thought he'd buried long ago. Victor Gray. Eliza hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years, but you never forget the man who decided which dogs lived and which ones didn't, who assigned you a handler, then reassigned that handler when they died, who wrote reports in past tense before the bodies were even cold. Ash noticed first. His tail stiffened, ears perked unnaturally high, and then came the sound, quiet but unmistakable, a low, guttural growl, so subtle only Eliza heard it, felt it, like a tremor in the fabric of calm they'd stitched so carefully these past months. Her fingers brushed the back of Ash's neck, grounding him. "Easy," she whispered, but her eyes never left Gray. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't move, but something flickered behind his stare. Not recognition, something colder. Assessment. Like he was watching a variable in a failed experiment behave in ways he hadn't predicted. Then, slowly, Gray turned and walked away. No fanfare, no words. He vanished into the corridor behind the bleachers as if the applause wasn't even for something real. Just noise. Eliza's stomach clenched. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, a bystander, a look-alike. But Ash didn't growl at phantoms. Ash remembered. Ash knew. The crowd surged forward, breaking her line of sight. Someone handed her a bouquet. Someone else shook her hand. "We loved your routine." "Is that an ex-military dog? Where can we see you next?" Eliza smiled tight, polite. Her eyes scanned the shadows behind the exit tunnel, but Gray was gone, erased like a chalk mark in the rain. She bent down, hands gently cupping Ash's face. "Did you see him too?" Ash didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just pressed his head to her chest as if saying, "I don't need to speak. I'm already between you and whatever's coming." Eliza closed her eyes, and for the first time since stepping into that ring, the applause felt hollow. It was the silence that woke her, not the wind through the cracked window, not the birds that usually stirred just before dawn. not the soft creak of old wood settling under the bones of the house, but the absence. Eliza's hand drifted instinctively to the side of the bed, expecting the weight of fur against her shin, the steady rise and fall of breath, the familiar warmth. Nothing. She sat up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. The air was too still. Her eyes flicked to the corner where Ash always lay, his usual place near the door, half guard, half ghost. Gone. The leash still hung from the hook by the coat rack, gently swaying. Not enough to be stirred by breeze, just moving. A chill crawled along her spine as her bare feet touched the floor. She crossed the room in 4 steps. The back door was open, not wide, just ajar like someone didn't quite finish the thought of leaving, and beyond it, the morning was smeared with gray. Fog clung to the tree line. The grass was wet, kissed with dew or tears, it was hard to tell which. Then came the sound, high-pitched, shattering. "Ash!" Lena's voice, splintered. Not the tone of a child searching for a dog in play. It was panic. Eliza bolted, down the hall, past the half-lit kitchen where last night's mugs still sat in the sink, one with a chipped rim, one with a lipstick stain Lena had giggled about. Lena stood at the back steps, barefoot, fists clenched at her sides. Her pajama pants were soaked at the hem, hair wild. Her face told the rest. "He's not here," she choked, eyes wide, already scanning the tree line as if she could will him back into existence. "He's not here. I thought maybe—" Eliza dropped to her knees beside her, grabbing the girl's shoulders, steadying the quake. "How long has he been gone?" Lena shook her head. "I don't know. I heard the door. I thought maybe it was you. But—" The leash. Eliza looked back at the wall inside. It still hung there. No one took him. He left. Voluntarily. Or lured. Ash didn't run. Not without reason. And if he'd gone willingly, something must have called him strong enough to break the bond they'd all fought so hard to rebuild. Eliza's throat tightened. There had been no whimper, no bark, no scratched door, just the weightless echo of a goodbye he hadn't been able to say. She rose, walked slowly to the threshold, and stepped out barefoot into the morning. Cold bit at her toes, but she didn't flinch. "Ash!" she called. It rang out like a prayer. The trees didn't answer. Only the leash, still swaying in the doorway, seemed to whisper back, "He was yours." And now, he's gone. The world didn't shatter in one loud crack. It unraveled thread by thread. By the time Eliza stepped back inside, her body moved, but her breath stayed behind, somewhere in the fog with Ash. Her vision blurred at the edges, like the frame of a painting dipped in water. She reached for the counter, missed, and slid to the kitchen floor. Her knees struck hard tile. She didn't feel it. The hum in her ears grew louder, familiar, terrifying. The leash still swung behind her, one memory, one sound, and everything she'd spent months rebuilding collapsed like glass under boot. Her hands trembled. Then her shoulders. Her chest tightened until the air thinned into strips. She gasped, but couldn't pull anything in. Her throat closed up like a fist. Her eyes were open, but nothing stayed in focus. Just flashes, gunmetal, desert light, a scream buried in mortar dust. And Ash, gone. "Eliza?" Lena's voice, distant, muffled, like it had to pass through 100 walls to reach her. "Eliza!" Arms wrapped around her, small, desperate. Lena dropped to her knees beside her. The girl's sobs came in hiccuped bursts, but her grip was steady, anchoring, "You're not back there," Lena cried. "You're here. With me. With Ash. He's out there, but he's not gone. You can't go away again. You promised." Eliza's eyes darted toward her, glassy and wild. She tried to speak, but her jaw clenched too tight. "You have to fight," Lena whispered, voice cracking. "For him, for us, for you." That broke something, not in the shattering way, but like thaw. Eliza's breath hitched once, then again, and then air. It burned as it entered, but it entered. Her hands still shook, her vision still flickered, but she could see Lena now clearly, the tear tracing a path down her cheek. The fear not for herself, but for Eliza. And Eliza broke down, not in panic this time, in grief, in love, in guilt. She pulled Lena close, clutching her like a life preserver in the wreckage of herself. "I'm sorry," she rasped, voice hoarse from the storm inside. "I didn't mean to disappear again." Lena didn't say anything. She just leaned in tighter, forehead to Eliza's. The leash stopped swaying. The house was quieter than it had ever been. No paw steps on the wood, no soft huff from under the table. Just the static silence of something precious ripped away. But Eliza wasn't on the floor anymore. She stood in the living room, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a rough knot. The wall above the mantel had been cleared. A corkboard now hung there, angled slightly, with pins stuck in corners, as if it had been yanked from a forgotten storage closet and resurrected for war. She pressed a thumbtack into the corner of a folded map. Oak Ridge County. Every trail. Every back road. Every place Ash might have been taken through or away from. Red thread ran through it, lines stitched like veins. A photo next. Gray. She stared at the grainy shot cropped from a local paper years ago. Real estate developer, former law enforcement contractor. Nothing ever proven. But his name had surfaced more than once in cases that smelled like burnt wires and cover-ups. Eliza didn't need proof yet. She had something stronger. Recognition. She could still see his face from the arena. Among the cheers and claps and joy, he'd stood like ice in sunlight, silent, watching, eyes flat as winter roads, and Ash had growled. Quiet, low, instinct. "Eliza?" Lena's voice was small behind her, but steady. She turned. The girl held a stack of printed maps and a highlighter between trembling fingers. "You said every route," Lena whispered. "I printed the southern trails." Eliza's throat tightened, not from panic, from purpose. "Good," she said softly, kneeling to the table. "Let's add them." They worked in silence, pinning, marking, drawing lines no one else would have seen. But this wasn't just guesswork. It was a language only people like Eliza or dogs like Ash could read. The routes Gray would have used, the ones not surveilled, the ones someone had shown her once, long ago, in the kind of training that left scars behind your ribs. Eliza picked up the phone. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like inevitability. The dial tone buzzed. She didn't flinch. "Riverside Police," a voice answered. "Detective Unit." Eliza didn't stutter. "My name is Eliza Hart," she said. "I believe my service dog was taken. I believe it was targeted, and I believe I know who took him." A pause. The kind that always follows truth. Then, "Go on, Ms. Hart." And she did. The precinct air felt sharper than the wind outside. Sterile. Still. Eliza sat in the interview room, shoulders squared, though her chest felt scrubbed raw. Lena waited just outside the frosted glass, arms around her knees. No one had slept much. Detective Kellen entered, weathered, gray eyes sharp, badge hung loose on a lanyard. "You called about Ash," he said. Eliza nodded. "He's my dog." And then she told him everything about the man in the crowd, the growl, the disappearance, the name she hated saying, Victor Gray. Kellen leaned back. Hard to pin, real estate fronts, quiet money. But people talk. He slid a thin file across the table. "You didn't get this from me. But off the record, he's been watched. Runs a kennel upstate, off-grid. No license, military contracts." He tapped a photo, barbed fence, mud, metal kennels. "Dogs come in one way, come out different." Eliza stared at it, rage rising. "He doesn't train obedience," Kellen said. "He teaches fear." Eliza's fists clenched. "Ash doesn't fear." "He might now." Silence stretched between them. "My brother had a dog," Kellen added. "K9, German Shepherd, Jet. Saved 2 kids, smartest partner he ever had." He paused. "He didn't come back from his last deployment." "Jet or your brother?" Eliza didn't ask. The grief was the same. "I'm not promising miracles," Kellen said. "But I'll pull what I can. If Gray took Ash, he'll cover his tracks." "I don't need miracles," Eliza replied. "Just a direction." Kellen nodded. "Dogs don't forget who they belong to." Eliza didn't thank him, but her silence meant she believed him. The wind at the Gray compound cut deep, not cold, but quiet. 3 squad cars sat behind yellow tape. The place was tucked in pine woods, old livestock property turned into something darker, legal on paper, hidden in truth. Eliza stood just behind the tape. Kellen hadn't told her to leave. Some things demanded witness. Officers moved carefully. Cracked fencing, rust-red kennel, a scar on the land. Kellen emerged, gloves off, jaw tight. "Did you find him?" Eliza asked. "No," he said. "But he was here." He held up a snapped police-grade leash, frayed, blood at the end. "He fought," Eliza whispered. Kellen nodded. "Claw marks everywhere, fence posts. Looked like he was trying to climb out, not climb, like he remembered where home was." Eliza's throat closed. "We don't know whose blood, but it wasn't quiet." He lowered his voice. "He didn't obey." Eliza blinked. Kellen continued. "Gray breaks dogs through fear, but Ash wasn't trained that way. He resisted, even injured. He fought back." Tears burned Eliza's eyes. "Tracks go west. Broken fence. Blood trail starts, then disappears. He escaped, or someone moved him." Eliza stared at the woods. "He's still out there," she said. Kellen didn't argue. She stepped closer to the blood-smeared post. One strand of fur fluttered black and tan. Ash. "I trained him to run toward gunfire," Eliza said. "If he's hurt, he'll hide, but he'll come back." Kellen nodded. "We'll widen the search, but Gray'll run if he senses us." Eliza's jaw set. "Then we dig." Back at the precinct, the fluorescent lights hummed too loud. Kellen tapped the monitor. A grainy gas station security feed. 4:17 a.m. Gray's truck. Parked across from a vet clinic. Eliza froze. Her breath cracked. "He's hurt," she whispered. "That's why he stopped." Kellen nodded. "He wouldn't risk towns unless necessary. A bleeding dog becomes a liability." Zooming in, they spotted something in the truck bed. Not a crate. a silhouette. Eliza's stomach turned. "The vet opens in 40, Kellen said. "But if Gray went off the books, we move now." Eliza whispered, "What if he's still there?" "Then we don't wait." They drove fast. The clinic was small, faded paint, sagging porch. Kellen flashed his badge. "Ma'am, did someone bring in a dog this morning? Between 3 and 5? The woman hesitated. Eliza saw it. Guilt. He didn't give a name. Dog was in bad shape, swollen eye, deep cuts. Looked like cage injuries. Eliza's knees buckled slightly. "Where is he?" "He changed his mind, left before sunrise." "Did he say where he was going?" "No, but I heard something switch to the southern trail." "He can't track what he can't smell," Kellen scribbled. "He's heading into the woods." Eliza's mind clicked. Gray wasn't hiding Ash. He was moving him. She turned to the vet. "Did the dog respond to voices?" The vet nodded. "He didn't flinch. He leaned toward me when I spoke gently, like he was trying to read what wasn't said." Eliza's eyes filled. That was Ash, still listening, still trying. Kellen touched her shoulder. "We're not far behind. If Ash is resisting, he'll leave signs." Eliza's voice no longer shook. "Then we follow." Rain clung to Eliza's coat like memory, cold, heavy, and impossible to shake. She pushed through the clinic doors without noticing the chime. Everything felt distant, like a bad dream wrapped in cotton. The receptionist looked up, recognition flashing in her eyes. "You're the one looking for the shepherd?" Eliza only nodded. "He's in the back," the nurse said softly. "Someone left him wrapped in a blanket. No note, no crate, just left." Eliza's breath caught. Her legs felt like they might give out. "I'll take you." They walked through sterile halls, posters on walls, scrubbed floors, pain clinging to every corner. At the final door on the left, the nurse paused. "He was sedated. For the pain, he's stable, but not moving much, like he's waiting." Eliza nodded. When the door opened, the world tilted. Ash lay on a steel table, wrapped in a blanket too thin for his battered frame, matted fur, swollen eye, bandaged ribs. But it was him. Eliza dropped to her knees, grief and relief colliding. "Ash," she whispered. He stirred. One paw shifted. His uninjured eye found her, and whimpered. She crawled forward, pressing her forehead to his. Tears soaked into his fur. "You made it back," she choked out. His tail moved barely. A tremble, a signal. "I hear you." The nurse quietly closed the door. Eliza stayed, cradled his head. Every breath he took was labored, but steady, defiant. Gray hadn't broken him, because Ash had chosen her. Even lost, he'd remembered the way back. She whispered, "No more cages." And for the first time since the leash went empty, Eliza exhaled. The light was soft through the blinds, morning rising gently. Ash stirred, a twitch of his paw, a sound deep in his throat. Eliza hadn't moved. She sat beside him all night, eyes raw, hands clenched like prayer. When his eyes opened, cloudy and searching, they found her. She reached for him. "Ash, it's me, boy." He twitched his ears, tried to stand. His body protested. He collapsed. She caught him. "Don't push. You're home." Ash leaned into her. His tail tapped the table. It was everything. Eliza sobbed loud, cracked, real. She whispered memories. Pancake. The porch, the way he stayed beside her when the world crumbled. The door opened behind her. Lena. No words, just a gasp. Then she knelt beside them and wrapped her arms around both of them. The silence broke. Not just Eliza's. Lena cried freely, releasing the fear, the ache, the weight of watching Eliza spiral into shadows. Now she saw her, bloodied, exhausted, but whole. Ash made a low sound, curled slightly toward Eliza. "He tried to come back," Eliza whispered. Lena nodded, touching his flank. And he did. They stayed like that. 3 lives tangled in sorrow, light, and something stronger. Ash blinked slowly. Sleep called him back. But his tail twitched, still listening, still there. Later, Eliza rinsed blood from her palms at the sink. Not his, not hers. But it felt like both. The nurse had taken Lena outside. Ash rested now, sedated again. Not in fear, but in survival. The vet came in late 50s, tired eyes, voice like soft gravel. She held a clipboard and an X-ray. "Eliza," she said gently, "we've done the scans. I won't sugarcoat it." Eliza turned, bracing. There's a hairline fracture in his front leg, non-surgical. Bruising, dehydration, torn pads, some scarring old and new, but he'll live. The words didn't land like victory. They landed like truth. The vet continued, "Mentally, it's harder, but his response to you that's rare. Most dogs shut down." "He didn't shut down," Eliza said. "He ran back to me." The vet nodded. "That's a dog who still believes in someone." Eliza stepped closer to Ash. He didn't stir, but his ears flicked faintly, like the thread between them still held. She crouched beside him, whispering, "You held on, even when I almost didn't." His paw twitched. "And now I won't let go." The vet gave her silence. For a few moments the world outside, sirens, cameras, empty leashes, ceased to matter. Lena returned, her voice steadier. "Detective Kellen's getting the warrant. Gray's going to be charged." Eliza didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on Ash. "I don't care about the charges." "Then what do you care about?" Eliza looked up slowly. "That he knows. Gray needs to know he didn't break him." There was steel in her voice now, forged in pain, tempered in loyalty. "He's not broken," she said. "Maybe bruised, maybe changed, but not broken." Lena swallowed hard, then smiled, soft, sad, beautiful. "And neither are you." Eliza didn't reject it this time. She nodded, and when Ash stirred in his sleep, her hand was already there. Not to pull him up, but to remind him he wasn't alone. Not anymore. The field behind Eliza's house had always been quiet this time of year. Tall grass faded to gold, the air still with that gentle hush before winter's first breath. But today, something different stirred in the wind. Not noise, not chaos, just a kind of lightness. A breath drawn in hope. Lena stood near the old fence, her hair caught in a breeze that danced like a lullaby. In her hands, she held the yellow ribbon, the same one Ash had worn the day of the showcase. It had frayed at the edges now, weathered like the rest of them, but it still caught the sun. Ash stood beside her. His body was thinner, a little crooked. He leaned slightly on one side where the fracture hadn't fully healed, but his posture held something stronger than symmetry. Dignity. He didn't flinch when Lena reached down, nor when she looped the ribbon gently around the notch in his collar. "There," she said softly, her fingers lingering just long enough to anchor the gesture. "Back where it belongs." Ash looked up at her, not with a wag of the tail, not with a bark or bounce, but with the language of his kind, an expression that seemed to say, "I remember, and I forgive the world, if only because of you." Eliza watched from the porch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea gone cold. Her knees still ached when the mornings came fast, and her chest still tightened if Ash disappeared into a room too long. But the spiral was loosening. The fear had a name now, and naming it had stolen some of its power. The back door creaked as she stepped down, her boots pressing gently into the soft soil. Ash caught the sound and turned. He didn't run to her. He waited for Lena to give a signal, and when she did, a nod and a whisper, Ash loped forward. Uneven, yes. Slower, yes. But determined. Each stride was a reclaiming, each breath a quiet rebellion against the man who'd tried to break him. Eliza met him halfway. She dropped to one knee in the middle of the field, arms open but not insistent. Ash paused, then leaned in. Their foreheads touched, and in that soft, sacred space between skin and fur, breath and memory, 1,000 unspoken things passed. "I missed you," she whispered. Ash didn't need to reply. His eyes said it all. There was no accusation in them, no question of why it had taken so long, or why the world had gone dark. Just a glimmer subtle, steady that joy wasn't gone. Only waiting. Lena called from the fence, "He wants to run." Eliza looked back at her, then at Ash. "Do you?" Ash blinked, and then, like a wind-up toy finally released, he bounded forward. His gait was lopsided, his back paw dragged slightly in the grass, but there was no mistaking the spirit behind it. Lena whooped, spinning in place before taking off after him. The yellow ribbon fluttered like a small flame against the sun, trailing behind Ash's collar as he zigzagged through the tall grass. Lena chased him, laughing in bursts, tripping and rolling, her palms gathering dust and joy in equal measure. From a distance it looked like any other afternoon, just a girl and her dog. But Eliza knew. She knew what it meant to see movement again after the stillness, to witness play after pain, to hear laughter that didn't feel borrowed. The wind picked up and carried the scent of hay, sun, and healing across the field. Eliza closed her eyes for a moment, letting it fill her lungs, feeling it settle into the cracks left by fear. She'd spent so long surviving that she'd almost forgotten how to live. Ash stopped for a moment halfway through the field and looked back. Not just at Lena, but at her. As if to say, "You too." Her legs moved without her asking them to, one foot after the other, and soon the three of them moved through the golden grass like a memory being written in real time. No medals, no speeches, just ribbons in the wind, a crooked run, and joy returning not all at once, but in fragments. And sometimes fragments were enough. The field that once held only ghosts began to take shape. Eliza stood with a tape measure in one hand, a rolled blueprint in the other. It wasn't much, just a sketched outline of a simple ring, a few markers for agility stations, a small shaded area labeled Rest Zone, Dogs Only. But in her mind, it was already real. "This one's for the tire jump," she murmured. Lena looked up from the bag of zip ties and poles. "And over here? The tunnels?" Eliza nodded. And together, they built it. Not in one day. Not without splinters, setbacks, or the occasional moment where Eliza had to step away, breathe, and remind herself this wasn't war. This was healing. This was home. Ash watched from the porch, his head tilted, tail thumping softly against the wooden floor. The yellow ribbon still fluttered from his collar. It no longer looked like a symbol of loss. It looked earned. By the end of the week, the circle was done. It wasn't perfect. The jump bar leaned slightly to the left, and the sand pit wasn't as level as it should have been. But it stood. And in that imperfection was something fiercely whole. Word spread, not through flyers or posts, but whispers. There's a place where the dogs aren't judged by what they've been through. A woman out there's building something. Not just for dogs, for us too. The first to arrive was a man named Harris, a Marine with hands that trembled even when he smiled. He brought a dog named Belle Blackcoat, scarred snout, eyes that never held direct contact for more than a second. "I don't know if she remembers what love is," he'd said, voice cracking. "She doesn't have to," Eliza told him gently, kneeling beside the dog. "She just has to feel safe enough to find out." Then came Miranda, a former medic who hadn't spoken in full sentences in years. Her companion, Tank, had once pulled bodies from rubble in Syria. Now he flinched at the sound of a lawnmower. Each week, another soul arrived, sometimes with fur, sometimes with memories, often with both. And Ash became the compass. He didn't bark commands. He didn't dominate. He walked beside the broken ones like he understood their language before they could speak it. When Tank froze at the agility pole, Ash lay down beside him. When Belle refused to enter the tunnel, Ash circled it first, then waited silently by the exit until she made her own way through. There was no judgment, only presence, only patience. The circle became more than dirt and rope. It became ritual. In the mornings, Lena would tie a new ribbon to the old fence. Yellow, red, sometimes blue each for a dog that made it through a session. Not perfectly, but present, moving forward, breathing. Sometimes the veterans would bring lawn chairs and just sit close but not speaking, watching their dogs take hesitant steps or nap in the shade or chase butterflies like trauma didn't win. Eliza kept a journal. In it, she recorded things that weren't measurable. Tank let someone brush him today. Miranda laughed. Ash licked a child's hand. Small notes, big victories. They didn't have a name for what they were building. It wasn't a clinic. It wasn't a program. It was a circle, a space where stories weren't forced out of mouths but coaxed out in motion, where wounds weren't erased, just accepted. One afternoon, as Eliza set out cones for a tracking exercise, she heard Lena calling out, "Mom!" She turned. Lena was pointing. Ash was trotting toward a new arrival, an older man, probably in his 60s, walking with a cane. Beside him was a German shepherd missing half an ear and most of his tail. The man stopped, unsure. Ash didn't. He approached, slow and steady, then sat right in front of the newcomer, looking up. Still. Quiet. The man blinked. He knows I'm not okay?" Eliza smiled. "That's why he came." They shook hands. Names were exchanged. The dog's name was Bishop. By nightfall, Bishop had followed Ash through the circle twice. The man hadn't stopped smiling since. The sun was beginning to fall, soft gold spilling across the field, brushing light over the circle they had built from scraps and second chances. Eliza stood at the edge of it, boots pressing into warm earth, shoulders pulled back, not rigid, not defensive, just steady. Beside her, Lena adjusted the strap of her backpack and squinted into the light. The girl had grown not in inches, but in presence, no longer the fragile child who clung to Eliza's arm in quiet fear. There was color in her cheeks now, curiosity in her gaze, and between them sat Ash, not like a statue, not like a soldier, but like something sacred that had survived. His tail brushed gently over the grass, thumping once. His scars, still visible, caught the amber light like old stories in a language only a few would ever understand. One ear perked at the distant whistle of wind. The yellow ribbon still fluttered at his collar. They watched as Harris led Belle through a slow weave between cones. Miranda stood farther off, one hand on Tank's back as they rested together in the shade. Laughter drifted from the porch, where a pair of visiting veteran strangers only a day ago passed around lemonade and old war stories they'd finally started reclaiming. Eliza's fingers grazed Ash's fur. He looked up at her. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his for a moment, whispering so only he could hear. "Do you feel it, boy? It's not the end. It never was." Ash closed his eyes. A soft sigh left his chest, content, grounded. Then Lena's hand found hers. Small, warm, strong. Eliza straightened. She looked over it, all this patch of reclaimed land, this mosaic of broken things reassembled, not as they once were, but as they needed to be. She drew a breath. Then, slowly, quietly, she said, "I thought I lost everything." The words hung in the golden silence. Ash shifted closer. Lena's grip tightened. Eliza looked out again toward the wide field, the ribboned fence, the makeshift track where Ash had once limped and now walked whole. Then she nodded once, as if to herself. "But maybe—" She paused. A breath, a small, almost smile. "This is where we begin." The wind picked up just then, catching the edge of the yellow ribbon tied to Ash's collar. It fluttered high, like a signal, a declaration, not of victory, but of survival, of return, of choosing life again. The kind built slowly, softly, together, in a world too often marked by loss, noise, and brokenness. Stories like Ash's remind us of something enduring, the quiet strength of love, loyalty, and healing. German shepherds, with their unspoken understanding and steadfast devotion, are more than just dogs. They are partners in pain, protectors in chaos, and companions in recovery. Through Ash, Eliza, and Lena, we witness that even the deepest wounds can mend, not by forgetting the past, but by building something new from it. This story isn't just about a dog being rescued. It's about what happens when we choose to stand again, to trust again, to love again. It's about second chances, not just for animals, but for people who've forgotten their worth. Let this be a reminder. Every scar tells a story, and every story holds the power to bring us back to ourselves. So whether you're holding the leash of a German shepherd, volunteering at a shelter, or simply believing in the kindness of strangers, know this: you're part of the healing. And somewhere, a tail is wagging in gratitude.